Next time you flex your bicep, I want you to try something. Just look very closely at how the tissue ripples and kind of bunches up under your skin.
It's pretty distinct once you actually pay attention to it.
Right. Well, ancient Roman anatomists did this exact same thing centuries ago, and they thought that flexing tissue looked incredibly like a tiny mouse, just, scurrying under a rug.
Which is such a great visual.
It really is,
Yeah.
and it's actually why the Latin word for mouse, which is musculus, eventually became our word muscle. So welcome to today's deep dive, where we are mapping the human body.
We are indeed.
Yeah, we are unpacking a stack of physiological research and anatomy notes, and we're specifically focusing on the major muscle groups. We really want to figure out how these biological engines actually drive human movement.
And that little mouse etymology, it's one of the most vivid origins in all of science, really. It reveals so much about how early medicine approached the human body.
How?
Well, those Roman anatomists they were dealing purely with surface phenomena. They were just observing dynamic shapes beneath the skin and using whatever everyday analogies they had at their disposal to make sense of the machinery.
Because they couldn't look inside.
Exactly. They just didn't have the tools to look deeper.
Okay, let's unpack this because, when you walk into a gym today or you sit down with a physical therapist,
Yeah.
the vocabulary is incredibly casual.
Oh, absolutely.
We say things to each other like, oh, I'm training my quads today, or my lats are feeling super tight. We talk about these major muscle groups as if they are hard taxonomic categories carved into the laws of physics.
Right, like their periodic table element.
Yeah. But according to the anatomical sources we're looking at today, a major muscle group is not actually a formal scientific rank at all.
No, it's not.
The human body has roughly, 600 to 850 distinct muscles, depending on how you count them. And this grouping system is really just a functional teaching tool.
Yeah, but that concept of a muscle group, that represents a massive paradigm shift in biomechanics. Because for centuries, classical anatomy looked at muscles as isolated, discrete pieces of meat.
Just singular objects.
Right. The primary question was simply, where does this specific string of tissue start and where does it end? But grouping them, it forces us to zoom out.
I see.
It shifts the perspective away from the isolated tissue and toward the actual joint action. Like, a sports medicine doctor doesn't just care about the structural integrity of one piece of tissue.
They're looking at the whole system.
Exactly. They care about the whole team of muscles that extends the hip or flexes the knee. That is the functional unit they have to manipulate to restore movement.
But getting to a point where we could actually understand those functional units, that took a remarkably long time.
It really did.
Before we could map the traffic rules of how these muscle teams cooperate, we had to build an accurate map of where they even were. And for about, roughly 1,300 years, humanity was operating on a map that was fundamentally and dangerously wrong.
Entirely because of a guy named Galen.
Yes, Galen of Pergamon.
He is a towering figure in medical history. He lived in the 2nd century CE, and he actually served as a physician to Roman gladiators.
Which sounds like the perfect job for an anatomist.
You'd think so, right? You'd assume that treating severe combat wounds would give him an unparalleled front row seat to human musculature.
Right, he's seeing the tissue laid bare all the time.
Exactly. But the problem was the legal environment of the Roman Empire. They strictly forbade the dissection of human cadavers.
So no matter what he saw in the arena, he couldn't actually study a human body systematically.
Right. He had to improvise. To build his anatomical maps, he turned to animals.
And I was reading that he primarily dissected Barbary macaques, which are primates and pigs, and then he simply extrapolated whatever he found in those animals directly onto his diagrams of the human body.
Which led to systemic, deeply entrenched errors.
I can imagine.
A classic example from the notes is the rate mirabile. Galen described this highly complex, intricate network of blood vessels right at the base of the brain. He wrote about it in exquisite detail.
Like it was a core feature of human biology.
Yes, he presented it as a fundamental mechanism of human anatomy. The issue, though, is that the rate mirabile does not exist in humans.
Wait, really? Not at all?
Not at all. It is a thermoregulatory structure found in ungulates, so animals with hooves, like sheep and pigs.
Oh, wow.
But because Galen's texts became the unquestioned, almost scriptural authority in both European and Islamic medicine, nobody dared challenge his findings.
It's staggering to think about. For over a millennium, surgeons were operating based on monkey and pig anatomy.
Yeah, it's wild.
To use an analogy, it's like trying to navigate your way through the streets of New York City using a highly detailed, beautifully illustrated map of Chicago.
That's a great way to put it.
The cartography tools were fantastic, the drawing was precise, but the subject of the map was entirely wrong.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Galen era is a profound cautionary tale for modern scientific inquiry.
How so?
Well, Galen's method of careful, systematic dissection, it looked incredibly rigorous. It had all the trappings of good science. But methodological rigor cannot save you if your underlying model doesn't match your target system.
Right.
You can execute a flawed premise flawlessly, and you will still be wrong.
So it wasn't until 1543 that someone finally fixed the map. Andreas Vesalius, who was an anatomist at the University of Padua.
Right, he took advantage of a more tolerant local attitude toward human dissection.
Yeah, he published a massive 7-volume atlas called De Humani Corporis Fabrica, or On the Fabric of the Human Body. And he didn't just tweak Galen's work, he completely rewrote it using actual human cadavers.
He identified over 200 specific places where the animal-based anatomy failed.
And his famous muscle men woodcuts these drawings of human figures progressively flayed to show the deeper layers of tissue. They essentially burst modern human myology.
But you have to remember, having an accurate structural map was revolutionary, but it only solved half the puzzle.
What do you mean?
Vesalius showed us the exact coordinates of the tissue. But a map of a highway doesn't explain how the internal combustion engine works, right?
Oh, sure.
For centuries after Vesalius, scientists knew where the biceps were, but they still didn't fully grasp the first principles of how that tissue actually generated physical force.
Which brings us to the fundamental rule of the road for human movement. The sources emphasize this heavily muscles-only pull.
Yes.
They never push. They produce mechanical force strictly by contracting and shortening themselves.
And the mechanism behind this is brilliant. But it wasn't fully understood until 1954, when two scientists, Andrew Huxley and Hugh Huxley, proposed the sliding filament theory.
Okay, break that down for us.
So if you look at a muscle fiber under an electron microscope, you don't just see a rubber band, you see thousands of repeating microscopic units, which are called sarcomeres.
Okay.
Inside every sarcomere are overlapping protein filaments, primarily actin and myosin.
And the way these proteins interact is the engine of all human movement, right?
The myosin filaments have these tiny molecular heads that reach up, grab onto the actin filaments, and physically pull them toward the center of the sarcomere.
So it's actively grabbing and pulling.
Exactly. It uses cellular energy, ATP, to fuel this stroke. Think of it like two teams of people pulling a tug-of-war rope hand over hand toward the center.
Oh, that makes sense.
As millions of these microscopic tug-of-wars happen simultaneously, the entire muscle belly shortens. It generates tension that pulls the muscle's mobile insertion point toward its fixed origin point on the skeleton.
Okay, but wait, I have to challenge this only pull rule for a second.
Oh, go for it.
Because I mean, the physics can seem a bit contradictory.
Yeah.
If muscles only pull, what is happening during a bench press? Or a push-up?
Right.
The vector of force is literally pushing a heavy barbell away from my chest, or pushing my center of mass away from the floor. How is that achieved if the tissue itself cannot push?
It's a common question. The confusion comes from mixing up the movement of the skeleton in external space with the mechanical action of the tissue itself.
Okay.
You have to look at the levers and the joints. During a push-up or a bench press, your pectorals in your chest and your triceps on the back of your arms are undergoing that exact sliding filament process we just talked about.
They're contracting.
Yes, they are shortening. The triceps, for example, is pulling on the olecranon process, which is the bony point of your elbow.
So it's pulling the back of the elbow joint closer to the shoulder?
Yes. And because of how the elbow acts as a hinge, pulling the back of that hinge tightly causes the entire arm to straighten out in front of you.
I see.
The mechanical result of those bones being pulled is that the barbell goes up. Every push you perceive in the gym is really just a cleverly disguised system of microscopic pulls operating skeletal levers.
Which perfectly explains why muscles have to exist in agonist and antagonist pairs.
Exactly.
If a muscle can only pull a bone in one direction, you absolutely need another muscle on the opposite side of the joint to pull it back.
Right, they can't unpull themselves.
Like the biceps brachii pulls the elbow into flexion, bending the arm, but it can't push the arm back out. You need the triceps brachii on the opposite side of the humerus to pull the arm straight again.
And this pulling constraint is also why muscles almost never work alone. They operate in highly coordinated teams. You have the prime mover, which is the main force generator for a specific action.
Right.
But you also have synergists. These are smaller muscles that assist the prime mover to add force or refine the movement path.
And the notes point out a third crucial team member, the fixators, or stabilizers. If we use a bicep curl as an example, the bicep is the prime mover. The brachialis underneath it acts as the synergist. But what are the stabilizers doing in that scenario?
Well, the stabilizers are keeping the scaffolding from collapsing.
What do you mean?
In a heavy bicep curl, the muscles of your rotator cuff, so the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis, they are firing continuously.
But they're not moving the dumbbell.
No, they aren't moving the dumbbell at all. Their job is isometric. They are pulling the head of your arm bone tightly into the shoulder socket, anchoring it there.
Oh, wow.
If those fixators didn't create a rigid base, the massive force generated by the prime mover would just dislocate your shoulder or cause your arm to flail wildly. The pulling force would have no solid foundation to act against.
So we have these intricate teams of pullers, complete with prime movers and stabilizers. But when you map the whole body, you immediately notice these teams are not uniform in size.
Not at all.
They follow a strict, measurable logic based on the actual physical labor they evolved to perform. I was looking at the extremes in the research, specifically a landmark 2014 MRI study by Hansfield and his colleagues. Can you walk through what they found regarding muscle volume?
Sure. The Hansfield study was published in the Journal of Biomechanics, and it is really a masterpiece of modern anatomical mapping. They used high-resolution MRI to scan the lower limb musculature of healthy adults.
Just scanning the whole leg?
Yeah, they quantified the precise three-dimensional volume of every single muscle from the hip to the ankle. And it proved with empirical data what biomechanists have long suspected, that muscle size correlates directly with evolutionary mechanical demand.
And that demand peaks at the gluteus maximus, which is the single largest muscle in the human body by cross-sectional volume.
The gluteus maximus is massive because human bipedalism, walking upright on two legs is an incredibly demanding battle against gravity.
Right.
That muscle extends the hip. Every time you stand up from a deep squat or climb a steep flight of stairs or explode into a sprint, the glute is the primary engine generating the immense force required to move your entire body weight upward and forward.
Now, compare that massive engine to the other extreme of the map, the stapedius. The notes indicate it is roughly 1 millimeter long, making it the smallest skeletal muscle we have.
It's tiny.
It's buried deep inside the middle ear. Why do we need a voluntary muscle that small?
Because the stapedius isn't moving limbs, it's managing acoustics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it attaches to the stapes, which is a tiny bone in the middle ear. When you are exposed to a sudden, violently loud noise, the stapedius immediately contracts.
Just automatically.
Exactly. It pulls the stapes bone slightly backward, stiffening the entire chain of tiny bones in your ear. This dampens the vibration traveling into your inner ear, essentially acting as an acoustic shock absorber to prevent hearing damage.
And then you have the sartorius, the longest muscle in the body. It looks like a thin, flat ribbon running diagonally from the outside of your hip all the way down to the inside of your knee.
Right, across the thigh.
And it's actually named after the Latin word sartor, meaning tailor, because it's the specific muscle team that allows you to flex and externally rotate your hip to sit cross-legged, which was the traditional posture tailors used when pinning fabric.
It's like a construction site, really.
What do you mean?
Well, the glutes are the massive industrial cranes, right? While the stapedius is like a pair of delicate microscopic tweezers. And what's fascinating here is how clinical vocabulary evolved as a direct response to this map.
Oh, like the movement terms.
Yeah, terms like dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, abduction, adduction. They aren't just academic jargon designed to gatekeep medical knowledge. They are incredibly precise coordinates. They name specific planes of movement so a clinician knows exactly which engine is firing.
Right. Like if you tell a physical therapist about a problem with dorsiflexion, which is, the action of lifting your toes toward your shin so you don't trip over your own feet while walking, they immediately know to look at the tibialis anterior muscle on the front of the shin.
Exactly. The movement term diagnoses the muscle.
But because we rely so heavily on these engines, and because there is an intense psychological desire to manipulate how they look, the map is heavily distorted by the fitness industry.
Unfortunately, yes. The multi-billion-dollar fitness and marketing complex thrives on exploiting anatomical half-truths.
Oh, totally.
They take a real physiological concept, strip away all the nuance, and twist it into a highly marketable but scientifically bankrupt myth.
Well, let's dismantle the most persistent one, spot reduction.
Oh boy.
The fitness magazine promised that doing 1,000 sit-ups will specifically burn belly fat, or that doing tricep extensions will somehow burn the fat directly overlying the back of your arms.
It's everywhere.
I read about this wild, definitive study from 1971 involving competitive tennis players that tackled this exact premise. How did that experiment finally put the spot reduction myth to bed?
The 1971 study by Chelvam and Steinberg is brilliant just in its simplicity. They realized that professional tennis players essentially perform a massive, ongoing spot reduction experiment on themselves.
Oh, because of how they play.
Right. A tennis player swings a racket with their dominant arm thousands of times a week, while the non-dominant arm does relatively little. If spot reduction were a real biological mechanism, the heavily exercised dominant arm should have significantly less subcutaneous fat covering it.
I mean, the muscles are doing all the work, so they should be burning the local fuel, right? That's the logic.
That was the hypothesis. So the researchers carefully measured the arm circumference and used skin fold calipers to measure the fat thickness on both arms of these elite athletes.
And what did they find?
They found that the dominant arm absolutely had more muscle mass. It had experienced local hypertrophy from the mechanical tension of hitting the ball, but the fat layer, it was essentially identical on both arms.
So what does this all mean for the listener who is trying to optimize their own health and workouts? Why doesn't the fat burn locally?
It means we have to respect how the endocrine system works. Fat mobilization is not a paracrine function. It is not controlled by local tissues signaling their immediate neighbors. It is a systemic hormonal process. When you create a caloric deficit, your brain signals the release of hormones like adrenaline and cortisol into your general bloodstream.
Okay.
Those hormones travel throughout your entire body, binding to fat cells and pulling stored energy from them based largely on your genetic predispositions. The hormones circulating in your blood do not care which specific muscle group happens to be contracting.
So you cannot dictate where the fat comes from just by flexing a muscle nearby.
Not at all.
That completely changes how you should view core workouts, I mean. But that's not the only myth. The notes also highlight muscle confusion, which was massive in the 2000s with DVD programs like P90X.
Oh, the muscle confusion era.
Yeah. The marketing claim was that your muscles will quickly adapt to a routine, so you must constantly change your exercises to confuse them into growing.
Muscle confusion is perhaps the greatest marketing rebrand of a very mundane biological truth.
How so?
Well, is exercise variation good? Yes, absolutely. It prevents repetitive strain injuries and keeps you mentally engaged. But from a cellular perspective, a muscle fiber does not possess cognition.
It can't think.
Right. It does not have expectations to subvert. A sarcomere cannot be confused. It only responds to mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and load. As long as you provide progressive overload, meaning you gradually increase the weight or the volume over time, the tissue will adapt and grow.
And while we are clearing the slate, we need to address the concept of toning.
Yes. Let's talk about toning.
The idea that lifting very light weights for high repetitions will somehow tone a muscle, creating a lean look without adding bulk.
Biologically speaking, there is no discrete physiological process called toning. Muscle fibers can essentially do two things in response to training. They can undergo hypertrophy, increasing their cross-sectional area, or they can atrophy and shrink.
So what are people actually doing when they tone up?
When people say they want a toned look, what they're actually describing is a combination of two entirely separate systemic processes. They want a slight amount of muscle hypertrophy combined with a systemic reduction in body fat so that the muscle's natural shape becomes visible through the skin.
It is not a special type of lean muscle contraction.
Exactly. It's just muscle growth and fat loss.
The notes also bring up a really counterintuitive point about muscle size, because we just assume a bigger muscle is automatically a stronger muscle.
Right, which makes intuitive sense.
But strength isn't just about cross-sectional volume. It involves complex mechanics like the pennation angle and something called neural recruitment. How does the nervous system actually dictate strength?
This is where anatomy meets neurology, and it's fascinating. The pennation angle refers to the specific angle at which the muscle fibers approach their attaching tendon. Muscles with straight, parallel fibers, like your biceps, they are built for speed and range of motion. But pennate muscles, like your quadriceps, where the fibers attach at an oblique angle, almost like the barbs of a feather, they can pack far more fibers into a given area.
Generating immense raw force at the expense of speed.
Exactly.
And the neural recruitment aspect.
Think of muscle fibers like a rowing crew.
Okay.
If you have a massive muscle, it's like having a boat with 12 rowers. But if your nervous system isn't highly trained, those 12 rowers are paddling out of sync.
They're fighting each other.
Exactly. Now, a smaller muscle with a highly trained nervous system is like a boat with 8 rowers who execute every stroke in perfect, explosive unison. The central nervous system literally learns how to fire more motor units simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
This is why smaller powerlifters can frequently outlift bodybuilders who possess much larger muscle volume. The neurological software is just as important as the muscular hardware.
The hardware and the software working together. Now, even with all these mechanisms understood and the marketing myths cleared away, the notes highlight that this map of the human body is not actually a settled debate.
No, it really isn't.
Mainstream biomechanics and clinical therapists are currently locked in a fascinating argument about where the borders of these major muscle groups actually begin and end.
Yes, the fascia debate.
Right.
The traditional Vesalius map we discussed views muscles as discrete, separately innervated units. The biceps is here, the triceps is there, and they operate independently. But in 2001, a manual therapist named Thomas Myers published a highly influential book called Anatomy Trains, which challenged that fundamental assumption.
Right. Myers proposed a model based on myofascial meridians, because fascia is the connective tissue that wraps every muscle, bone, and organ in the body.
Yes.
Traditional anatomy viewed it as, like, mere biological wrapping paper, just packaging. But Myers argued that fascia is actually a continuous structural tension network. He suggested that muscles are functionally linked along these long fascial lines spanning the entire body.
And it relies heavily on the architectural concept of tensegrity, tension, and integrity.
Explain that.
In a tensegrity structure, a change in tension in one corner immediately affects the stability of the entire system. Under Myers' model, tension in a muscle in the arch of your foot can theoretically transmit mechanical force all the way up through your calf, across your hamstrings, up your back, and into your neck.
Entirely along a continuous fascial wrapping.
Yes. Instead of isolated pulleys, the body is a global web.
And the research indicates this is a very live, unresolved conflict. Strict biomechanists are deeply skeptical about how much actual mechanical force can transmit across these long fascial chains versus how much is just localized postural compensation.
It's a heated debate.
But clinical manual therapists and sports medicine practitioners use myofascial release every day, and they swear by the systemic results.
Which is true. But this raises an important question, though. We've covered history, cellular mechanics, and cutting-edge fascial debates. But why should you, the listener, care?
Yeah.
Beyond optimizing a gym routine or settling an academic argument, why does understanding the map of your major muscle groups matter for your actual life?
Because it completely shifts your perspective on aging.
Exactly.
It takes the motivation away from, trying to look good in a swimsuit and redirects it toward protecting your quality of life 50 years from now. Because the physiological reality we all have to face is sarcopenia.
Sarcopenia is the age-related involuntary loss of skeletal muscle mass and strength.
Right.
As we age, our bodies naturally lose muscle tissue, particularly the fast-twitch type 2 fibers that generate explosive power. If we are not actively applying mechanical tension to maintain those muscle groups, they atrophy.
They just shrink away.
The medical community now recognizes sarcopenia as a primary driver of frailty, falls, and the devastating loss of physical independence in older adults.
Which makes sense. When a geriatric physical therapist evaluates a patient in their 70s or 80s, they are completely unconcerned with spot reduction or muscle confusion.
Not at all.
They are laser-focused on specific major muscle groups, particularly the large powerhouses we discussed, like the gluteus maximus and the quadriceps.
Because if the pennation angle flattens and the volume of those specific groups weakens beyond a critical threshold, that person can no longer generate the force required to stand up from a chair on their own.
Or they can no longer catch their center of mass if they stumble on a curb. Understanding how to maintain this map is quite literally the key to keeping your autonomy.
It provides the operating framework for human longevity. You cannot prevent structural failure if you do not understand the engineering of the system.
We have covered incredible ground today. We learned how the sliding filament theory proved that muscles only pull. We watched Vesalius finally correct a 1,300-year-old monkey anatomy error.
A very necessary correction.
Yeah, and we saw how systemic hormones disprove the myth of spot reduction, and we explored how fascial tensegrity might connect our feet to our necks.
It's been a journey.
But here's where it gets really interesting, though. I want to leave you with one final thought from the research that completely reframes this entire map.
Oh, the muscle count.
Yeah. Despite MRI machines, despite electron microscopes viewing actin and myosin, the world's top anatomists still cannot agree on exactly how many distinct muscles you have. The textbook number ranges wildly, from 640 up to over 850.
The massive discrepancy exists because anatomists cannot agree on how to classify multi-headed muscles.
Right.
Consider the quadriceps femoris on the front of your thigh. Quad implies 4 heads. Are those 4 heads just distinct divisions of one single muscle group? Or are they 4 entirely separate muscles that just happen to share a tendon and work synergistically?
It is a profound epistemological problem.
It really is.
At what point does a complex, multi-part biological structure stop being one unified thing and become several individual things working together in a trench coat?
It's a great question.
If the greatest scientific minds and the highest resolution scanners still can't agree on where one muscle ends and another begins, maybe the human body is just too beautifully interconnected to ever fit perfectly into our rigid categories.
We're more than just our parts.
Maybe those ancient Roman anatomists had the right idea all along.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to stand back, watch the dynamic movement under the skin, and marvel at the little mice scurrying beneath the rug.
Well said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the map of the human body. We'll catch you next time.